This video is brought to you by ExpressVPN. Learn more at expressvpn.com/wisecrack. What's up, Wisecrack? Jared again. Black Mirror recently returned to Netflix with its 5th season, and the response has been mixed, or at least more mixed than usual. Many have noted that the show feels different, and they're not wrong. After diving into fan reactions, it seems like the main criticisms of this season are, first, that technology doesn't drive the plot of the episodes like in previous seasons. Second, that it isn't giving us the same head-scratching questions it used to, and third, that it feels like the show lost its edge in how far it's willing to go. But do these criticisms hold up? We're gonna find out in this Wisecrack Edition on Black Mirror Season 5, Deep or Dumb. And of course, spoilers ahead for all seasons. But before we get into it, I want to give a shout out to this week's sponsor, ExpressVPN. A VPN is a virtual private network which encrypts all your online actions and protects your information from getting stolen. You can safely log into all your favorite platforms without the fear of having your Netflix password stolen, or worse, your banking info. ExpressVPN has an app for every device, so you're even protected on the go. If I'm out and about and out of data, I'll try to log into a public Wi-Fi hotspot, so it's really comforting to know that EVPN will protect me if I accidentally try to connect to a fake hotspot. A hacker can easily steal your data and then sell your info to the highest bidder online, whether it's to ad companies or someone on the dark web, so it's good to know that with EVPN, I'm protected. ExpressVPN has the fastest speeds of any other VPN and is less than $7 a month with a 30-day money-back guarantee. So take back your internet privacy today and find out how you can get 3 months free by clicking the link in the description or by going to expressvpn.com/wisecrack. And now, back to the show. Let's start with the first episode. Striking Vipers tells the story of estranged friends Danny and Carl, who rekindle their friendship and much more through a VR video game called Striking Vipers. A morally ambiguous virtual fling ensues, but Danny breaks it off out of respect for his marriage. Unable to find the same kind of passion with another digital partner, Carl attempts to revive their digital romance. They eventually decide to test their attraction in real life to lackluster results, and then get into a real fight that blows the lid off their affair. A compromise is reached at the end wherein Danny and Carl can hook up online once a year, and Danny's wife can go to an actual bar and bang an actual dude, which feels a little unbalanced. Or is it? So let's dive into the first issue. Technology no longer drives the episodes. In Striking Vipers, we're presented with a state of domestic equilibrium that is upset once Carl introduces the TCKR virtual reality system into Danny's life. And this basic premise drives the entire drama of the episode. Danny's infidelity, whether or not our two players have feelings for each other, and so on. However, if we compare it to the episode The Entire History of You, we can see a slight variation on the Black Mirror formula. Like Striking Vipers, this episode introduces a new gadget and frames it around a couple struggling with infidelity. Expanding how we document our lives on social media, the Grain is an implant that stores a perfect record of everything you've ever done for instant recall. It even shares some of the same visual cues as Striking Vipers. In The Entire History of You, the application of the Grain technology escalates as our protagonist uses it to uncover more and more troubling elements of the past. Initially, it's used to reflect on a job interview or show off a vacation. Then it's used to adjudicate a fight.
I didn't mean that.
You're a bitch.
I'd like you to erase that.
You're a bitch.
Until finally, at the end, our protagonist is physically forcing someone to relive their most intimate moments. Striking Vipers, however, introduces the morally ambiguous application of technology at around the 20-minute mark, and the rest of the conflict escalates only within the relationship dynamics. In other words, the premise that you can now use VR gaming to have sex via avatars is established early on, and the ways in which the technology is used doesn't escalate, save for the dude who screws a polar bear.
The polar bear.
Still, Striking Vipers is probably the most classic Black Mirror of the 3 episodes. And that's because the technology does create a premise which drives a series of philosophical questions about said technology. What does romance mean in a world where VR can beam ultra-realistic images into your brain? As porn gets more and more sophisticated, at what point does it become cheating?
But it's not cheating. It's not real. It's like porn or something.
Come on, man. You know it ain't right.
What does that VR mean for sexuality when a straight dude can embody a female avatar and have virtual hetero sex with another straight dude? Or more broadly, how does VR technology affect our perception of self? If Carl is attracted to other men, but only when inhabiting a female avatar, can virtual reality allow us to access previously dormant aspects of ourself? Or are these aspects exclusive to the VR experience? The influence of digital avatars on our meat space selves is a pretty fascinating area of study. In the book Infinite Reality, authors Jim Blaskovich and Jeremy Bailenson detail several studies exploring VR's psychological effects and how VR does alter our perception of self, both while and after using it. For instance, people inhabiting a taller avatar feel more confident during and after using VR. Inhabiting an attractive avatar makes people more warm and social. Inhabiting older avatars makes younger people more concerned about saving money, and using a physically fit avatar makes people want to exercise more. To be fair, the book isn't about screwing people via digital proxies, but the larger point can help inform our understanding of the episode. As Striking Vipers suggests, the effects of VR aren't just limited to the game. Both Carl and Danny's IRL relationships suffer, and it makes them ask basic questions about who they are, as they both have to consider if they truly love each other outside of the digital world. They don't, which raises the question of how much our physical bodies shape our relation to the world. When we enter into a new corporeal form, do we also inhabit a whole new identity? This more or less speaks to a mind-body exploration, but more precisely a mind-avatar one. But as many have pointed out, the episode doesn't offer any firm answers to any of the questions raised about identity. And part of that leads into the third criticism, that the show has lost its teeth. Because it doesn't offer any answers, it's hard to see it as giving any biting commentary on technology. Whereas the entire history of you ends in the ruin of our protagonist's marriage, Striking Vipers ends with a more or less optimistic state of equilibrium. Although this may be a new flavor of Black Mirror only occasionally seen in the likes of San Junipero, its lack of soul-crushing pessimism doesn't necessarily make it a bad episode. Although it breaks some elements of the Black Mirror formula, it's still an episode with big questions to ask about real scientific and social issues. So this episode gets a Wisecrack certified deep. The second episode, Smithereens, tells the story of rideshare driver Chris, who kidnaps an intern from the Twitter stand-in Smithereen, holding him to ransom so he can speak to the company's Jack Dorsey-esque CEO, Billy Bauer. When they're finally on the line with each other, Chris explains how he killed his wife in a car crash because he was distracted by the app. With his mission fulfilled, Chris tries to kill himself, but the intern intervenes. In the scuffle, a police sniper fires at Chris. The end. So first up, does technology drive the episode? Well, sort of. The main plot may seem like a regular kidnapping story, but Chris's ability to get hold of the right people at Smithereen is entirely dictated by his access to a phone.
Your phone? Where's your phone?
Sitting on the call.
Asymmetrically, the Smithereen technology has immediate access to everything about him pretty immediately. This discrepancy often drives tension, as Chris uses Smithereen to find out they've been spying on him, bringing him ever closer to the edge. The big distinction between this and other Black Mirror episodes is that we're not constantly introduced to novel applications of some future technology in order to escalate the conflict. It's also worth noting that this episode takes place in the recent past, so there's nothing really sci-fi here, which is fine. But if that's the premise, then you hope the show has something profound to say about the technology we currently have. Unfortunately, this is where some people feel Smithereens is at its weakest. So does it give us a good philosophical question or two? A lot of the criticism leveled at this episode comes from the twist, the revelation that Chris crashed the car and killed his wife because he was checking his phone. Some have seen this as a sort of don't text and drive PSA, which is not exactly original or interesting as entertainment. But beyond that, there might be a much more foreboding message, namely how much control large Silicon Valley companies have over our lives and society in general. Using data, Smithereen can discover everything about Chris long before the police or even the FBI.
Listen, Ms. Wu, we've identified the suspect.
Christopher Michael Gilhaney, former school teacher.
33 years old. He has a Smithereen profile.
Also, Billy Bauer gleefully invokes a God mode on his laptop. Its exact function is unclear, but we'll take a hint from the word God. Far from being just a criticism of how we use social media, the episode is a critique of society's dependence on it as a whole and the terrifying power these companies wield. This is framed by a grieving mother, looking for answers about why her daughter killed herself by trying to figure out her social media passwords.
I'm her mum. You'd think they'd give me the password to my own daughter's account, but no.
Of course, the companies won't help her, meaning a faceless tech company knows more about her daughter and her death than she does. But then there's Bauer's speech about him losing control of the company alongside Chris's confession about the crash and its causes.
I'm like some kind of bullshit frontman now.
As a climax, these two speeches may not have the same everything's gone to shit and we're all doomed aspect that other Black Mirror stories have, but it has a lot more emotional bite to it that's equally hard to ignore. The show doesn't just lay the blame solely at the feet of a smartphone user when things go wrong. As the show hints, it's as much the fault of the unchecked optimization for addictiveness and rampant privacy invasion, which has created a world where phone companies themselves have to make PSAs telling you to turn your phone off when driving. It might not be offering any new philosophical questions or interpretations of technology, but it speaks volumes to modern frustrations around corporate control. For that reason, we're giving this episode a soft deep. Well, let me rephrase that, we're giving it a deep enough rating. In the final episode, Rachel, Jack, and Ashley 2, Miley Cyrus plays Ashley O, a thinly veiled version of Hannah Montana, who feels trapped in her pop persona and suffers from depression. Meanwhile, superfan Rachel gets a robot version of Ashley O that malfunctions when it learns that Ashley is in a coma brought about by her evil aunt, who drugged her to take control of her creative output. The robot is an exact copy of Ashley's consciousness and asks Rachel and her sister Jack for help to free the real Ashley. They take the robot along, save the real Ashley, and expose her evil aunt. As we've mentioned, in typical Black Mirror, the technology is what pushes the story along. Whether that's the exercise bike economy, a memory reading implant, or making a sex doll based on your dead boyfriend's tweets. Obviously, this episode has technology, the Ashley robot, its consciousness, some software that can write songs from brain scans, and so on. But there's one big problem. The tech isn't actually important to the plot. Let me give you a little scenario. If in Nosedive we swapped out the people rating software for anything else, say a central written record of whether or not people hate you, the episode would not be the same. You could not make a cautionary tale about how people's judgments become increasingly dangerous without the technology that amplifies those judgments. Nor could you comment on people's online personas versus offline. That's how a ton of good smart sci-fi works. You can't remake Star Trek by replacing a starship with a Honda Civic. Conversely, if you gave John Wick a laser Gatling gun, we wouldn't say it's about technology like Black Mirror is. That's because whether he's using a hunting knife, a gun, a book, a pencil, or some yet undiscovered killing device, the point is still that someone killed Keanu Reeves' dog. Rachel, Jack, and Ashley 2 falls into that latter camp. It's essentially kids get roped into a pickle, break into some stuff, do something important, and all become friends. Whether they have slingshots or a sentient doll is besides the point. You can replace or reframe a lot of the tech in this episode and still tell the same story. Take for instance the brain-scanning songwriter. If they just stole her diary to write songs, the plot is functionally the same. There's a fancy computer that rewrites her angsty songs to be poppy, which a human could have done. Also, there's a hologram, which we've already done to poor Tupac. That one is harder to extricate from the plot, but the basic question of what happens when an artist loses control of their intellectual property doesn't really need tech to play out, but we'll get there. Ashley 2 isn't about electric mouse catchers, robot dolls, or songwriting software. It's about two lonely teenagers and an exploited pop star looking to fill a void in their lives. But even if the technology isn't driving the plot, it's still a big part of it. So what is it saying about the technology? The idea that a piece of software can be used to extract and rewrite something as abstract and creative as a piece of music is certainly interesting, but it's actually a little behind the times when it comes to the music industry exploiting artists. The question of artists not owning their music or likeness has been going on in the courts for 50 years or more. Michael Jackson bought the publishing rights to the entire Beatles back catalog, Amy Winehouse never consented to the releases of the demos and unreleased tracks that made up her posthumous album Lioness, and the late Dr. John had songs released under his name without consent that the label hired an impersonator to sing. Intellectual property disputes don't require a futuristic technology to tell their story. So what about the question of a consciousness being trapped inside of a device? Well, this has been better explored in several episodes before, but most notably in White Christmas. The second of the stories in White Christmas shows a consciousness being trapped inside a digital egg that is tortured into submission to act as an electronic home assistant. At the beginning of the story, we're shown how painful and disorienting the process of removing the cookie containing the digital self is, and the snapshot of the existential questions you'd ask if your consciousness had been duplicated.
Oh my god, am I dead?
No.
The idea of maintaining consciousness outside of the body and the questionable ethical and moral areas is at the center of White Christmas, but left unexplored in Ashley 2. the robot and the real Ashley meet each other with no existential crises. At first, we expect everything to go horribly wrong with the Ashley 2 and for there to be awful consequences to this technology, but that's not what happens. Instead, we get a fun, heist-style adventure that abandons most of the tech in favor of a car chase. So, if it isn't as much about the technology and what it's saying about tech isn't very new or interesting, then it surely must have a sobering finale, right? Something like Ashley doesn't make it and the ant makes billions off her brain, or the robot having to create its own existence, but unfortunately not. Ashley 2 has the most unambiguously happy ending of all three, which is probably what pissed so many people off about it. There are no profound lessons about the digital future to be learned, but maybe something to be learned about how we interact with one another in real life. It's just a fun episode. For that reason, we're giving this one a hard dumb, but that doesn't mean we didn't enjoy it. Since it began, Black Mirror has constantly delivered a sense of catharsis about where technology is taking us. But with things like China's social rating system actually happening, maybe the show has realized that we can't put the lid back on the Pandora's box of technology. So instead, it's trying to offer suggestions on how to navigate life in our modern digital dystopia. There's no point in telling people to beware of what technology might one day mean when we're already hyper-aware of those dangers, and in some cases, living them. Instead, Charlie Brooker seems to be giving us more of an emotional bite that might help us better understand our current digital domain. For that reason, we're going to give Season 5 as a whole a soft, deep rating. Because you know what? At least it's trying. Keep doing you, Black Mirror. But what did you think, Wisecrack? Was the latest season deep or dumb? Leave us your thoughts in the comments, and we'll see you next time. Thanks to all our patrons who support the channel and our podcast. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. And before you go, I want to give another shout out to ExpressVPN. A VPN encrypts all your online actions and protects your information from getting stolen. Getting a VPN has changed the game. We use it every day at the office, and since they have the best speeds, it doesn't even disturb our day-to-day internet usage. You can get ExpressVPN for less than $7 a month with a 30-day money-back guarantee, and right now you can get 3 months for free by going to the link in the description or by going to expressvpn.com/wisecrack. Thanks again to ExpressVPN, and as always, thanks for watching, guys. Peace.